Hey everybody, this is Laurie Meyer from stampedgreetings.com, and today I wanted to show you a really fun technique to make cards that look like these. These are made using the beautiful new Botanical Layers stamp set. And if you don't have this stamp set in your stash, you might want to consider adding it. Or you can shop your own stash and probably find some really pretty foliage stamps that you have that you can easily use for this technique. And I am just going to kind of jump in and show you. I think that's the easiest way to do this. So I'm going to pull these examples out of the way, and we're going to talk about the paper that you are going to need to make this project. And I'm just going to put this example out so that we can look at the paper while we're talking through this. So the first thing that you're going to use is a piece of cardstock as your card base. And because I'm doing foliage, I wanted this to look very natural, just very organic, I guess. And I chose the really pretty color of crumb cake. It is nice and neutral, but it has a really nice soft color as well. And this piece is cut to a traditional A2 size card base. So you're going to start with 8.5 by 5.5. It's half a sheet of regular cardstock. So again, 8.5 by 5.5. And on the 8.5-inch side, you're going to score it at 4.25. And that gives you your card base. Then for the front of the card, so where we're going to do our stamping, I am using basic white. You could use any kind of neutral color that you want. I think white is just a really nice canvas for bright colors. And I'm going to put some nice greens and also some of the bright colors that are in the current in colors on my card. And white just really helps them stand out. This is basic white, and it is cut to 4 inches by 5.25. So again, 4 by 5.25. And what that is going to do is it's going to give you a nice border all the way around when you put your card together. All right, so those are 2 of the pieces, the card base and then the focal point. And we'll talk about these other 2 pieces in a little bit more detail in a couple of minutes, but we're going to have a band, and that has some scoring on it. And I'll show you what I did to put that scoring. That's going to be part of the front that really divides the stamped image from the sentiment. And then I wanted to play on some of the colors that I've used in the stamped image. And this is Evening Evergreen. So I'm choosing to really pronounce that Evening Evergreen color in the design. And that's a piece of Evening Evergreen cardstock. But don't worry, I'll give you the dimensions on these 2 in just a couple minutes. The real fun of this is taking your focal point, and again, in my case, it's the basic white, and doing some really fun stamping on that. Now, I bet most of you use your Stamparatus for stamp positioning so that you can get images exactly where you want them. And if you don't get enough ink on them the first time, you can ink them up again and go over the same spot and get more coverage on a stamp. And obviously that's really the main focus of a Stamparatus. But I also use mine as a second pair of hands. And it comes in really handy for many reasons. And I'm going to show you in making this card one way that this Stamparatus is going to help me keep everything straight. Forgive the fact that I've already used this piece of grid paper, just ignore that. And what I'm doing with this piece that I'm going to be stamping on is on the left side, I've just aligned it to one of the inch marks, one of the darker lines. And all I'm going to do here is I'm going to just position that for just a second. Now let's take a look back at this example, because what I need to do after I've got my paper together, I need to mask the bottom. I'm going to be stamping so that I've got a line that is going to be where I don't want any ink to go lower than that particular line. So here's what I'm going to do. I've got a piece of scrap basic white. And the only thing that I suggest as far as the size of this piece is you definitely want it to be wider than the focal point piece. And this is 4 inches. So if you get it at least 4.5, I would say that's good. This is a lot more than 4.5, but it was the piece that I had on hand. So I'm just pulling it out. And I'm going to bring this back in because I just want to kind of eyeball about where I stopped that stamping. And I'm going to stick my paper. I'm going to put it so that that dotted line is going to help me visually just place this piece of paper on top of the focal point. And I'm going to check that. Yeah, that's okay. Actually, I'm going to just leave it there. That's good enough. I'm getting a little too persnickety here. Then I'm going to take my magnets and I'm just going to put those down. What they're doing is they're just holding this piece away and down on the top of this paper so I can do what I need to do. I'm going to tear off this edge just because I don't want my hand to get bumped when I'm coming in and out. And you may have noticed too that I've oriented the Stamparatus so that the edges where you put the plate in are to my left and on top. I'm a righty, so when I come in and I do my stamping, I kind of want a clear area. I don't want to be blocked by these, and that's why I've oriented it this way. I'm going to scoot that over just a tad because I'm going to start doing the stamping. And for the first card that I'm going to do, I'm going to bring out this stamp. It is really nice, very dainty. It is the one that I used primarily to create this card. And I am simply going to put that stamp onto an acrylic block. And I'm using a D block. And I'm just going to put it so that I get that entire image on the block. I want to be sure that when I'm pressing down, that I'm putting enough pressure all around that image. And then I'm going to grab 2 green colors. And I chose 2 of, I think, the prettiest greens. These are in colors from, let's see, it would be 2021 to 2023. So these are not the absolute latest in colors. They're from the set that is going from 21 to 23. And I've got soft succulent and evening evergreen. I'm going to start with the darker color. And I'm simply going to open up my ink. I'm going to position my ink pad so that I can stamp off on this scrap piece down here. Good idea to have a scrap piece of paper. And what we're aiming for is we're trying to get some of the foliage to be different heights, different angles, and different shades of green, so that it doesn't look like we took the same stamp set and stamped it again and again and again side by side. So that is a pretty easy thing to do with stamps like this. So I'm just getting this nice and stamped, and you can see that I've got a good coverage of ink on that. And I'm just going to kind of go in on the middle here and just go right ahead and go ahead and ink that down and press it nice and hard. And I've got my image. Now you're going to notice a couple of things. One is that if you look really closely where these 2 pieces of paper come together, there's going to be a gap in where the ink coverage is. Don't worry about that. That's why we're going to put a band in the middle. So that's going to cover up the gap. So don't worry. The other thing is, notice on your stamp, see where there's more ink that's kind of left over here? That's where that gap was. So what I don't want to do is I don't want to stamp a second generation where I would see that concentrated ink. And I'm going to show you what I mean. I want to stamp this again without re-inking, so I can get a kind of a lighter shade of that evening evergreen. But I'm going to intentionally make the image lower. The reason is I don't want to get that concentrated area of ink that didn't come off on my paper. So I'm intentionally pulling this down. I'm also going to twist it a little bit. So the foliage is going to look like it's in a different position. And you can see it's faint, but that's okay. That is perfectly fine. We're going for different concentrations of the color, different positions of the stamp. So this time I'm going to come in and I'm going to do it a little bit even in a different direction. Then I'm going to check my ink and you can see I've got that same thing going on. So I'm going to bring that down to the right bottom and ink that. And we've got a different intensity. This time, just for something different, I'm going to stamp off. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to kind of position about like this. All right. This is one of those techniques that you want to underdo. You don't want to overdo your stamping. You want to kind of quit while you're ahead. And then if you need to, you can go back and fill in some of the blanks. So I'm going to stop here for now, and I may come back after I've added my second color and fill in some of the blanks. And I'm using one of the chamois to clean the stamp off. I love this thing, as you can tell. It looks like it's a mess. Okay, it is a mess, but I'm simply, after I'm done with this project, I'm just going to go and rinse this underwater. It will stay inked, but that ink is not going to come out and hurt anything. And cleaning is a breeze. So I highly recommend the chamois. The second color that I'm using, this is the soft succulent. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to come in here, get some really good ink on my stamp, and I've got a halo on the top of that. So I'm just going to be careful when I go in and stamp this. I've got a little bit of ink right at the top of the image. So I'm not going to press really hard up at the top. And see how we're building some different layers of color. And then I'm going to come in over here and I'm going to intentionally try and get this at a completely different angle. And I did get a little bit of that halo. That's okay, because I'm going to be adding some color and also some bling. Bling will hide little mistakes that you make. So I am not even worried about that. And I'm going to come back in and do a little bit more with the soft succulent and add a touch more over here. All right. I think I want to add a little bit more of the evening evergreen right in there. So this is where I'm kind of looking at what the design is to this point. And now I can go back in and fill in the blanks if I want. So I just cleaned my stamp off with my chamois, and I'm going to get my evening evergreen out. I don't know about you, but usually I only keep one stamp pad open. If I'm using a lot of different colors, I tend to close stamp pads up just because I have been known to ink a stamp from a color that I really didn't need to or want to. And that is not what you want to do. All right, now I intentionally put that one there for a couple of reasons. One is I wanted some of that evening evergreen over here. And the other one is where I had that little halo, that little line. You can hardly see that. And I'm going to show you how I'm going to hide that even more. And then I'm just going to do one itty bitty dark green over here. And then we're going to say that we're good. I'm happy with that. I think it has a lot of just fun colors and different intensities of those greens. And if I hold it up to the camera just a little bit, you're going to see those intensities a little bit more. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to add some color and a little bit more in the design. And what I am going to do is I'm going to use this little stamp that is in the Botanical Layers stamp set. It is so much fun. And sorry, my camera is moving around when I'm using my chamois to get my stamp clean. But that little stamp is just too much fun, and I can see so many uses for it. If you don't have the stamp set and you're using another foliage set, look for an image that might be for the middle of a flower, or honestly, you could even use a little snowflake and it will give you the results that I'm going for here. So I'm going to mimic the colors that I have in this example. And there are 3. They are from the new in colors. One is Sweet Sorbet that I will use. One is Tahitian Tide, I think my favorite new in color. And then the third is Orchid Oasis. It really doesn't matter what order, and use whatever colors you like. You're going to come up with some combinations that I know you are just going to absolutely love. And half the fun of this is coming up with a design that is all yours. So same thing, I put that stamp on an acrylic block. I just stamped with the Sweet Sorbet or inked it up. I'm going to randomly put in some of this color, and I'm going for 3 generations of ink. So dark, darkest, darker, and lightest. And I'm going to come back, and I'm trying not to really get a pattern here. I don't want this to look intentional. And I'm going to add some color right down where we've got that gap, because it's kind of fun to have a little bit of color right by that band. So you can do that intentionally. And we'll just add a little bit more right in there. And let's see if I have enough ink left. Well, this is where I overthink. All right, that's good enough. And then I'm going to take my chamois, try not to shake my camera. Can't guarantee that. And just take the ink off of that stamp. And then we're going to go for the next shade. And I am randomly going to just pick the one that's on the top, and that happens to be Orchid Oasis. So that's going to be my second color to add. This is a gorgeous, gorgeous color. And the different intensities in this Orchid Oasis, it can look like a blue violet. It can look like a really kind of a periwinkle blue, just depending upon how much ink you have on the stamp when you're using it. I really love this color as well. I actually love all the new ink colors. I think they're gorgeous. And I'm obsessed with them. I will confess that. I have been using so much of the in color paper, both just the cardstock and the designer series paper. It's gorgeous and so much fun. And I've been having a lot of fun. I'm going to put a really dark bit right on the edge just to give a little interest. And I think I'm going to do one more on the left, just to help kind of pull the eye to the edge, but also focus it back in the center. All right, the last color I'm going to add on this one is the Tahitian Tide. And I did mention that this is my favorite of the new in colors. At least today it is. And I think it is. It's gorgeous. It is such a rich color, such a playful color, but it works so well in many different types of projects, you know, from birthday cards. It's gorgeous for anniversary cards, and for the very difficult sympathy card, it is also just stunning. Really, really pretty. And see how I put a little bit of that color right down at the bottom. And again, I'm overthinking this a little bit, but that's okay. And now I'm going to step back and just see, are there any areas where we need color, even if it's stamping off and then adding a little bit. And I'm going to quit while I'm ahead because I will overdo it if I do any more. Go ahead and close that up and I will clean off my stamp. So again, this is something that if you find when you're done with your design that you want to go back and add, obviously go for it. You know, it's one that you can easily switch out the stamps that are on your blocks and you can come back in with a change if you want to do that. But I'm good with where we are. So the next thing that you're going to want to do before you start putting your card together is figure out what sentiment you want. And I love the sentiments in this stamp set. They are a mixture of text and script, and they're really pretty, and they work incredibly well with ink. So I have already set up my Stamparatus, and this time I'm going to use it like we traditionally do. I'm going to go ahead and position it so I can bring my plate in, and I'm going to turn my paper. When I stamp on the Stamparatus, and this is just me, 99% of the time, I don't scoot my paper all the way over to the edge. I find that the stamps that I want to use, especially if I am putting them toward the edge of the paper, that they tend, for me anyway, to stamp better if I bring them out just a tad. So I tend to line the right side of my paper up with the edge of that second piece. And as I mentioned, I've already put my stamp onto my plate. So I did cheat, but I'm going to go ahead and stamp that. And I'm going to use the Evening Evergreen. I just think, again, since I'm making this with foliage stamps, that I really want to use greens and browns and really earth tones to just make it look very, very organic. I know that's a word I've used a little too much already today. And I'm just going to go ahead and stamp that down. Isn't that pretty? I just love that. And this is one of those cards that it's not a lot of layering. It's not a lot of work, but it really has a pop. It's just a really pretty design. All right. So now we're done with our stamping and we are ready to put the card together. I am not going to take my Stamparatus out of the mix just yet. I'm actually going to use it one more time. But before I do that, and I'll just set it right here, I want to talk to you about the pieces of paper that I used to add the band. Let me bring the example back in. So we've got two pieces of paper that were used to make the band. And this is what they end up being. So I'm going to show you what they end up being, but I want to talk a little bit about how this piece was made. So I like to have just a little bit of interest in layers of paper when I put them onto a card. And again, I wanted this card to look natural, but also to have a little bit of interest in the background. So what I did is I got a piece of crumb cake and I cut it so that it is wider than my card because I'm going to be trimming this. And it's actually wider than the white piece, so it's greater than 4 inches. This was a little bit bigger. It just happened to be what I had on hand. And I wanted it to have a little bit of personality. So I took my scoring board and I scored at 1/4 inch intervals. So I took this and I did 1/4, 1/2, 3/4 inch, 1/4, 1/2, 3/4 inch, all the way down on the sheet. Then I turned it over and I filled in the middle. So in other words, on the other side, I did 1/4. On this side, I'm doing 1/8. On the other side, I did 1/2. This side, I'm doing 3/8. So you can see that when it's done, it almost looks like a corrugated piece. And it just has this little fun, whimsical value to it. It is not necessary for this design, and you may decide that you don't want it, and that's perfectly fine. Whatever makes you happy. To get the band, the piece that you're going to put on the front, you're going to want to cut it to 1/2 inch in width. So this is 1/2 inch by, this one's about, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5 inches, which is way, it's too much. So I would only need about 4.5 probably, but make that 1/2 inch wide. And then the second piece is simply a piece of cardstock. I decided not to do anything to this. This is just cardstock, but it is the evening evergreen piece. And I made sure that it was just a little bit wider. So this is about 4.5 inches, and it is 1/4 inch in width. So those two pieces are what we're going to use to make the front. And I'm going to bring my Stamparatus back in again. And I'm not crazy about where I'm putting this, although I'm trying to find, if you look over here, I'm trying to find a solid line that is about where I think I need to put the piece of crumb cake. And let me show you what I'm talking about. Remember that gap that we said that we had because the two pieces of basic white don't come together completely? So I want to position my crumb cake so that I'm getting a pretty solid design at the bottom, and that's pretty good. If I bring that crumb cake down a little bit, you're going to see I'm going to have some gaps over here. That's not what I want. I want to have a full design that is going to sort of bump up on the top of that crumb cake. So I'm going to position that, and then I'm just going to bring my paper so that that crumb cake is lying on that straight line. So it's right on that inch line, the dark line, and that's just going to help me line things up and try to get it as straight as I can. All right. So then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put my magnets. I'm holding the focal point down. I need to be able to move this piece. Now, I'm not going to put glue on this piece. I'm going to put glue on the focal point piece. If I put glue on this one, I might put the glue too far and it will go over the edge. I know where I need to put the glue here because I know where I'm going to put my piece of crumb cake. So I'm just going to take my glue and put a little bit of a line. It doesn't need to be thick. It doesn't even need to go all the way to the edge. So I'm just putting a little line of glue. And then I'm going to take the piece that I have for my crumb cake, and that dark line is where I'm trying to line this up. Trying to get that, pretty much on that line. And that's going to help me get it as straight as I can. So here's another use for this Stamparatus. It will help you to get pieces where you want them to go. If you made the score lines in that piece, you're also going to see that the score line is going to be straight up and down. So that's going to help you also align this as best as you can. And I'll just let that sit for a second. And then I'm going to trim this crumb cake piece before I add the evening evergreen. And I'm just going to snip from the back. Always snip from the back. Just going to snip those off. And now I've got a really nice finish on my card. Just going to pop that back in. You can pop it in. You don't really have to pop it in to the Stamparatus because you've got a really good way to align your piece of evening evergreen. And again, I'm not putting the glue on my cardstock. I'm going to put the glue on the crumb cake. And I'm going to eyeball this. I'm not going to get crazy. Just going to try and get that glue kind of in the middle. And then I'll take my evening evergreen piece and I'm just going to put that straight down. And it doesn't need to be perfect. You're gonna have a pretty good visual of getting it in the middle. And then do the same thing. Just turn this over and snip off evening evergreen. So let me get that a little bit closer. There we go. And snip it off over here. All right. So that's the front of the card. So let's go ahead and finish the card that we've been working on. And what we're going to do there is we're going to get our card base. And you'll remember that that was a piece of crumb cake that was cut to 8.5 by 5.5 and then scored at 4 1/4 on the 8.5-inch side. Now, if you're like me, I always make sure that I know where the front of the card is. I bet you've done this too. I've gone through the trouble of making a really pretty card front, and I've put it on the back of a card. And then had to figure out how to cut the back off to get everything the way I want it after being a little frustrated for a while. So just make sure that you know where the front of your card is. And then you're just going to adhere that directly onto the front of your card. I like green glue because it gives me an opportunity to move things around just a tad. I'm going to flip that over and just burnish it with my hand a little bit. And then to finish this card, before I bump the camera one more time, sorry if that made you dizzy, I'm going to add a couple of the absolutely beautiful brushed brass butterflies. You can tell that I love these because this is at least the second package that I have gone through. And I think they are just gorgeous. They're so whimsical. They add a lot of character without adding a lot of bulk. They're very flat. I only have the small ones left. They do come in 2 sizes. I'll show you the 2 sizes on the example card that I made, but I was so in love with these that I've already used up all of the ones that were larger. So I'll just put that one up here. And I do like to use the rule of odd numbers for embellishments on the card. You can see this is the larger of the 2. So you've got smaller and larger butterflies. So here's an example, 2 different cards using that same design. And I actually have a third that I've also made. So each one of those is going to have just a little uniqueness, which is really fun. All right, so those are the cards that I made with the stamp that we looked at, this stamp. I want to show you, I'm not going to make the entire card, but I do want to show you just a couple little tips and tricks of how I stamped the background for this card. And in order for me to do that, I need to swap out the stamps that I'm going to use. And I'm going to use 2 stamps from this set. They are gorgeous by themselves. And then when they're put together and used together, they're a lot of fun. So I'm just going to go ahead and get those onto my blocks. And essentially we're going to do the same thing. So I'm just going to quickly show you how to put an image like this together. And we're going to use the same basic technique that we already have done. And also we're going to use the Stamparatus like we did before. So again, I'm just going to put in my focal point piece. The only thing I'm trying to do is align that so that the left side is right up against one of the dark inch markers. And then I'm going to bring in another piece of basic white. I'm gonna eyeball this. If you don't have an example, because obviously you wouldn't until you make one, just give yourself about a third or so of room down at the bottom to do what you need to block off part of that image. So I'm just going to get my mask all set up, put my magnets down. Again, I don't want that extra piece of paper interfering with me when I am doing my stamping, so I'm just going to take that off. And I want to show you, I'm going to start with the darker leaf. So on this one, what I decided to do is to use one ink color for one of the stamps. And this stamp, I'm going to use the Evening Evergreen. And this stamp, I'm going to use the Soft Succulent. I think for me, I think the darker looks better lower in the image, and the lighter, the higher is going to look better in the background. At least from the minimal playing around that I have done, I've come to that scientific conclusion. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my Evening Evergreen. And this is going to look very similar to what we did with the other stamp. Making sure that I've got a really nice coverage of the ink, trying not to get any on the edges of my stamp. And I'm going to come in and just go ahead and ink down. Same thing's going to happen. We're going to have that little gap where we may not see some ink. But what's nice about a single stamp like this is you have more freedom to reposition your image so it looks like the image is not being duplicated. So I'm going to come back in, stamp that down, and then I'm going to come in with a little bit of a lighter just to fill it in at the bottom a little bit. And then we're going to come over here to the right. You can see I keep moving that magnet around, just trying to get a different, sort of a different angle. And then come down and fill in that little space down on the bottom over there. And then I'm going to stamp off. I don't want to completely overrun what I've done in the middle here. And then we're going to do one down at the bottom. So that's kind of cool to me. That looks pretty good. I'm going to do one more right down here just to give it a little bit filling in on the edges. And you're going to find when you do this kind of stamping that your taste is going to be different than other folks. And that is perfectly fine, obviously, because you need to make this the way that you like it. All right, so now I'm going to pull in the Soft Succulent and the other stamp. This is the taller stamp. Again, I'm just going to make sure that I've got some really good ink coverage on here, trying not to get it on the side of my stamp. And I'm going to intentionally bring this higher. I'm trying to make it look like it's sort of in the background. And I think with that lighter ink, it does it. So with that lighter ink in the background, you can really see the height. Just going to try and do that again. And then I want one more. And I'm going to try something here. I'm going to take a second generation and put that in the middle. Not bad. That looks pretty darn good. All right. So again, when you're doing this, just experiment, figure out what shades you like. And the only way to do this is to get out a couple of stamps and to just try it. So I'm just going to clean off those stamps. And then the last thing that I want to show you is the flowers that I added to this particular card. They are some more of the stamps that are in this beautiful stamp set. And they're the ones that look like very dainty flowers. There is a smaller and a larger. And honestly, they almost look like snowflakes. And I'm gonna pull those out. So there's the larger one and there's the smaller one. And with stamps like this, with this size, you can cheat, if you want to call it cheat, and only use one block. Just put one stamp kind of off to the side on one side, flip your block over, and you can put another stamp on the other side. And then you can just position your block vertically when you don't need it. And that way you won't get any ink where you don't want it either, because the stamps are going to be hanging out vertically as well. I'm going to use the same colors that I did on the other design. So I've got my Tahitian tide, and again, don't overthink it. Just go for what you think you like. I just flipped my stamp over, my block over, and I've got the larger of the two there as well. And on this one, because the flower images are bigger and because the foliage is bigger, I'm not going to put as many flowers in the design. Moving on in just a minute to the Orchid Oasis. Just want to make sure that I am washing off my stamps here. And you especially want to make sure that your stamps are nice and clean if you're going from a darker to a lighter color. And see how I got that halo on there? So I just want to be super careful when I'm putting this on that I'm not pressing down too hard. And then I'm going to flip my stamp over. There we go. Again, I'm going to be careful because I did get a little bit on the edge. And just add in some color. All right, and then we're going to finally put in our sweet sorbet, and you'll see the colors really do pop. And as I mentioned, I think part of the fun in putting a design like this together is to figure out what color combinations you like and what works together well. I'll be anxious to see what you make. All right, I'm bringing in the sweet sorbet and doing the exact same thing. Just checking that. I think the sweet sorbet really helps just bring out even the other colors, the Tahitian tide and the Orchid Oasis. It seems like when you add that sweet sorbet, it tells your brain that there are other colors that you need to be paying attention to. So again, I am not going to overdo. I am going to stop and allow that to be okay. All right, so that would be the beginning of the second card. And I'm just going to bring the final card that I made using those stamps in. And you're going to see that we've already gone through what the next steps would be. So I would add my sentiment down here, just like I did on the other card. I would add my band, just like I did, and then put the piece on top of the crumb cake card base, and then add some bling. And in this case, just like I did on the first, I added some of those brass brushed butterflies. That is a tongue twister. I am not going to go through the detail of how to make the third card because this one is really pretty straightforward, especially since we've already gone through the other two. There is yet another stamp in the Botanical Layers stamp set. that is a different kind of leaf, and it was the one that I used to make this card. It's just fun. It has some really cool patterns, and it is very easy to change the direction so that you get different ways that you believe, you know, you have multiple plants in that card. On this card, I used both the soft succulent and the evening evergreen, and I just kind of mixed and matched where I put the images. And then I thought it could be a very nice masculine card and decided not to use the butterflies, but instead I used the rhinestone basic jewels and just added a couple in that. So there you have it. These cards are, like I said, and I hope you would agree, since we've gone through and we have made 3 of them, they're pretty quick, they're pretty fun. And what's really nice is every time you make one of these, you're going to get a different result, because you will be holding the stamps differently. The shades of your ink are going to be different. You can very easily change the sentiment to whatever you want. And I hope you have fun with these. And I hope you consider adding this amazing stamp set to your collection. I will add a link to the video, so down below you can see that. I'll put all the information on my blog, which is at stampedgreetings.com. And also, if you'd like to purchase this stamp set or any of the other supplies that I use to make the cards, you will have a link to get to my online store. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you have a great time getting your fingers inky and making these cards. Until next time.